Thank you for watching. My name is Glen Morgan, and this is We the Governed. Figured I'd just go right into the show here because if you're watching my channel, more than likely you care about what's coming up in the 2022 elections, and we are not that far away. So by the time this video airs, we're going to be less than a week away from elections. And of course, in Washington State, we don't really have election day. We essentially have election weeks. But it's because of the all-mail-in voting and the weird trickle-in effect of all these late ballots as they come in, and from various trunks of election workers' cars or other sorts of places. So we don't really know for sure what the election results are on election night, but we know where they start, and then as they count more of these ballots as they come in over the next couple weeks, we'll get a sense of where things are going. So I thought it would be worthwhile to talk about where these races, what to watch for the elections. Again, I'm focused on Washington State, the state that's been under an eternal emergency until just recently when Governor Inslee, who I've always made a point of saying that nothing I say here has been approved by Inslee's Ministry of COVID Compliance. And that's true. It's still true today. But that emergency is now officially technically over on Halloween. It started in April Fool's Day, and years later on Halloween it came to an end. It actually didn't start on April Fool's Day. It started in February, but it was nevertheless, I'm really more thinking about our governor when I'm talking about that. And of course, this is a good thing that the eternal and endless and pointless emergency that lasted forever and was a great excuse for Inslee came to a close just in time for your kids to go out and trick or treat, and just before the elections of 2022. So let's talk about this, because inevitably what happens is on election night, a lot of people are glued to their television screen or their computer or their phone, and they're trying to track what's actually happening in elections. And of course, most of the attention is going to be spent at the federal level, looking at big races in Arizona or Florida or Pennsylvania or Nevada and other parts of the country. And Washington State oftentimes feels like just a little bit of a backwater and compared to what's going on in those areas. Yes, we've got a couple of congressional seats here that get a lot of attention, a couple of congressional seat races that get a lot of attention. We have a big Senate race, that's a federal Senate race, that gets a lot of attention. But generally, the question is, if you're going to pay attention to Washington State elections, what should you be paying attention to? And hopefully I just summarize a couple of the highlights, because after all, election results will initially post at 8 p.m. if you live here, and they aren't going to change much until the next morning, but you can always stay up a little bit later in case they post a little bit more and people stayed glued to the screen, as I've done many times on election night. You might be one of those people. Here's what I'd be looking for. Number one, you need to go to the Secretary of State's website. The official results do post here initially, and you can actually look at them by county, and you can dive into it deeply. I'll probably be doing something on election night, hopefully get some information posted up at that time just to tell you what I'm watching for, but I'll tell you right now what I'm watching for in advance. And the highlights are, number one, the federal Senate race, and why this matters and why it's more than just a Senate seat in Washington State. Number two is the control of the state legislature. Various races, about 17, 18 of them around the state that are really worth paying attention to, and then some select local races because of the indication of those, depending on how those results go, how they could affect the state in other ways. So let's get into it first and explain why I think that this is more than just a typical Senate race in Washington State and why it really matters. Now, of course, the big showdown here is between Republican Tiffany Smiley, who's challenging Patty Murray, who's been fossilized in office since the time, shortly after the time that Clinton was elected. It's kind of absurd, but she's been there so long. There's an entire generation of voters that doesn't know what it would be like to live in the state without Patty Murray at the top of that D.C. ticket. And if you saw the debate recently where Smiley really devastated Murray in a situation in which I'm sure Murray couldn't believe anybody dared question her, it really shows the Republicans have run a pretty very competitive race here. And you know, Smiley had a couple things that has a couple things that are working against her in theory, in the sense that she's never held elected office before and she's from Eastern Washington. To the political class that would use those would both be considered things that are a net negative, especially living in Eastern Washington. They definitely count that as more negative. For a lot of people who are voting for, including myself, I view that as pretty positive. And the one thing she did really well is started early, planned ahead, did a really good job fundraising, and managed to have a very unified Republican message and effort behind her. That doesn't happen very often. Usually the Republicans self-immolate, but the primary was a relatively easy thing for Tiffany Smiley to get through. And so this is coming into the big head-to-head race. And why this is more than just the Senate race is that a lot of people who are looking at whether a Republican can win statewide office are looking at this race. They're going to look at the results. So it's not only whether if Tiffany Smiley can win, but if she doesn't, is it really close? I mean, there's going to be just a lot of detailed data work that's done to pay attention to this race. So Tiffany Smiley's race is a big deal, and it's a big deal it'll affect probably strategies for statewide Republicans who'd be running in 2024 for the governor's seat, for the AG seat, for any of the other statewide offices. They're going to be looking at how Tiffany's campaign was organized compared to how other Republican candidates would be organizing their campaigns. This race is a big deal, and it's more than just what happens on election night in Washington. Now, the one thing I want to caution people is that whatever the result is on election night, it's going to change substantially after that because of all the additional ballots that keep coming in. And one thing, or at least that continue to get counted, and one thing I'm going to point out is that it has been a trend lately, ever since the Joe Kent race, the congressional race down in the 3rd Congressional District, for a lot of Republicans, a lot of conservative voters to wait and go and turn in their ballots in the last couple days or even the last day on election day rather than drop it in the mail and let it filter through the system. The tendency has been to go and hand deliver it, and that tendency seems to keep increasing as a percentage of the vote, and so you may see a big surge of Republican votes getting counted later just because they brought them in later. We'll see if that's true and if that remains true in a bigger election compared to the primaries, but that's going to be something that a lot of people are going to be paying attention to, and this is the top of the ticket race in Washington, so that's going to be the one that they really watch. Now, the races that I'm going to be paying a lot of attention to, and you should as well, are going to be who controls Washington State Senate and Washington State Legislature. There's basically it's a 4-seat difference. If the Republicans win 4 seats, they control the state Senate by 1. If they win 9 seats in the House, they control the state House by 9 or by 1. So it's pretty narrow on the number of votes that they need there. So you only have 49 elected state senators, and you have 98 elected state representatives in the state legislature. So this is a relatively close margin, and it's generally believed that the Republicans should be able to pick up seats. The question is how many. And if they're able to pick up 4 in the Senate, Republicans control the Senate, and that's a big deal. It serves as a brake on some of Inslee's worst ideas and some of the Seattle crew's policies that they're pushing through the state legislature. Same within the state and same with control in the state legislature. Even if the Republicans get really close and they're only off by 1, as we've seen in the past, all it takes is one Democrat who crosses over and it suddenly shifts the balance of power, which has happened numerous times just in recent years. So this is a big deal. There's about 17 different races around the state that people are going to be paying a lot of attention to and really looking at how those race results occur up in Whatcom and out on the peninsula and in Snohomish County and King County in particular. There's just a lot of these races that people are really watching. The 30th in Federal Way, the 47th over in Kent, the 28th in South Pierce County, the 29th in Pierce County, which even the 38th up in Snohomish County, 42nd up in Whatcom. These are all races that are really going to get a lot of attention, and depending on how those results come in those areas, it could make a very big impact. So those are the things you're going to want to watch. If it looks trending well, then freedom and liberty may be in better shape if the Republicans can get a majority, even in just one house, or get very close in both of them. Depending on what happens, it's a big deal. And if you know me, you know I've been working on these initiative projects, and if there's a majority of Republicans, if they're able to control both houses, that is a sea change effort in getting those last signatures to get that initiative project across the line. So that's a big deal. There's some other local elections that are worth watching around the state, even if you don't live in these counties. But they're worth watching because I think they bode they indicate other things that would happen throughout the state. The local auditor races, which I've touched on a few times in Spokane and Mason, a little bit in Clark, and even Kittitas, these are races that are contested, and because of all the drama around elections and the weird DC money that's flowed into Washington State, into some of these counties, and the bizarre media obsession with protecting the establishment that's just popped up almost beyond anything I've ever seen before in these various counties, it clearly indicates that if you see some of these auditor races flip, then that indicates that people are getting very frustrated and that there's some more change that's likely to come in the future as well. This is kind of the cycle where most of these positions are up, and that's going to be a big deal. The other one to watch is going to be the King County prosecutor race. And this really matters because you have two very distinct people, and one of them is just completely crazy. The person who's running with the more leftist kind of baggage is, if she gets elected, if that person gets elected, you're just going to see a disaster in the making, and it will be bode very poorly, I should say, for crime and just for the structure of public safety in King County. We really do need somebody in there who's willing to actually prosecute criminals. And it's basically Jim Farrell is running as somebody who actually is willing to prosecute criminals. And listen, I've had my own problems with the guy in the past. You can look at my PDC complaints that I filed. I filed some on him, but I'm going to tell you, he's the only guy there running for that position who actually cares about prosecuting criminals. That's going to make a big difference. It affects 37 cities. It affects surrounding counties. It's a big deal. That prosecutor's office, it'd be nice to have somebody who's sane going in there and who actually wants to keep the community safe rather than somebody that wants to just unleash the most violent people they can possibly find on the community. So that's a real contrast. It's pretty dramatic. I actually think the ranked choice voting issue down in Clark County that's on the ballot is actually, it's a big deal. I would be watching that because that's a terrible idea. We've talked about it before on my show, and if Clark County makes a mistake of going down that road, it's my fear that you'd see other jurisdictions do similarly stupid things. So hopefully the voters are able to reject that very bad idea. It's on the ballot now. They're a charter county. That's why they have initiatives like that on the ballot. There's other things to watch too. I mean, the Spokane County, this is the first time Spokane County is electing 5 commissioners instead of 3, so that's going to change the balance of power in the future of that county. You see a big, costly ballot proposals on the ballot up in Whatcom County. You see a decision of whether or not Thurston County is going to go from 3 to 5. There's all these other races. I realize I'm not covering all of them, and I'm not pretending to in this video. I just want to let you know, I know there's a lot of those races. They matter a lot to where you live. There's a lot of races for where I live in Thurston County that I really care about. But if anywhere you live in the state, these races are very important to watch. And we are sure to do some more videos when we get to election day/week to give you an update of where those election results seem to be heading and what is going on. But at this point in time, if you watch this video shortly after it's published, you still have time to get your ballot filled out and send them in. You have time to go and influence a bunch of other people around you who might be falling asleep at the switch, too apathetic, not paying attention, or whatever, and they've forgotten that election day is coming up. It's shocking how many people are in that camp. You might as well get as many of the good people that'll vote with you, get them, remind them, help them get those ballots filled out, and get them in those drop boxes, get them hand-delivered. I don't mind delivering it right on just the day before the election day. I do kind of deliver mine late now, but don't be late. Don't be the guy who left it on your front counter, let it get buried under a bunch of other mail, and then you didn't send it in. Or the guy that left it in his car and thought you drop it off and just forgot about it, buried it with a bunch of kids' clothes or something else. I'm not saying that hasn't happened to me before. It has. So it can happen to anybody. So really pay attention and make sure you actually get that ballot in. And in means don't stick in the mailbox really late, because you never know if the post office is going to properly mark it at that point in time. Go and get it into a drop box. That's still better than mailing in. That's my opinion. And but at least just get it in the system so that it gets counted at some point in time. So with that, if you want to learn more, go to wethegovern.com. Feel free to log in down below or go to some of the links I've linked down below. I've tried to provide a couple of source links if you want to track elections and some other details that might be interesting to you. And just remember, in addition to voting, the other thing you need to do is show up, because the future belongs to those who show up.